Let's see, just so that way for the sake of time, man. So this is the Color of Justice. This is chapter 3 of the New Jim Crow. So Tiana, what's up? So I'm going to be reading the New Jim Crow. The book is written by a woman who was one of the Department of Justice lawyers. And in it, she talks about the New Jim Crow being the war on drugs. I was going to read the introduction and then, it's good, cousin. And then, from the introduction, just start trying to read chapter by chapter. I'm going to do about 30 minutes of the third chapter of the New Jim Crow, which is the Color of Justice here. So without further ado, if you will turn to the third chapter, will you have it say amen? No, I'm playing. The Color of Justice. Imagine you are Emma Faye Stewart, a 30-year-old single African-American mother of 2 who was arrested as a part of a drug sweep in Heron, Texas. All but one of the people arrested were African-American. You are innocent. After a week in jail, you have no one to care for your 2 small children and are eager to get home. Imagine the pressure, right? And are eager to get home. Your court-appointed attorney, we know about those, urges you to plead guilty to a drug distribution charges, saying that the prosecutor has offered probation. You refuse, steadfastly proclaiming your innocence. Finally, after almost a month in jail, you decide to plead guilty. So after a month, she says, yup, I'll take the probation. You decide to plead guilty so you can return home to your children. Unwilling to risk trial and years of imprisonment, you were sentenced to 10 years of probation in order to pay $1,000 in fines, as well as court and probation costs. You are now branded a drug felon. You are no longer eligible for food stamps. You may be discriminated against in employment. You cannot vote for at least 12 years, and you are evicted from your public housing. Once homeless, your children will be taken from you and put into foster care. A judge eventually dismisses all cases against the defendants who did not plead guilty. At trial, the judge finds that the entire sweep was based on the testimony of a single informant who lied to the prosecution. You, however, are still a drug felon, homeless and desperate to regain custody of your children. Now, place yourself in Clifford Ronaldo's, an African-American victim of the heroin drug bust. You return home to Bryan, Texas, to attend the funeral of your 18-month-old daughter. Before the service begins, the police show up and handcuff you. You beg the officers to let you take one last look at your daughter before she is buried. The police refuse. You are told by prosecutors that you are needed to testify against one of the defendants in a recent drug bust. You deny witnessing any drug transaction. You don't know anything about what they're talking about. Because of your refusal to cooperate, you are indicted on felony charges. After a month of being held in jail, the charges are dropped against you. Technically, you are free. But the arrest and period of incarceration, you lose your job, your apartment, your furniture, and your car. Not to mention the chance to say your final goodbyes to your baby girl. This war on drugs, these brutal stories described above are not incidental, nor are the racial identities of Emma Faye Stewart and Clifford Ronaldo's incidental. In every state across the United States, across the nation, African Americans, particularly in the poorest neighborhoods, are subject to the tactics and practices that would result in a public outrage and scandal if committed in middle-class white neighborhoods. In the drug war, the enemy is racially defined. Law enforcement methods described in Chapter 2 have been employed against exclusively in poor communities of color, resulting in jaw-dropping numbers of African Americans and Latinos filling our nation's prisons and jails every year. We are told by drug warriors that the enemy of this war is a thing, drugs, not a group of people. But the facts prove otherwise. What's up, Mimi? What's up, Davon? Man, so look, after we get done reading, I want to bring a couple of y'all on to talk about some of these statistics. Some of these statistics that we're about to go through in Chapter 3 here. Human Rights Watch reports in 2000 that In 7 states, African Americans constitute 80% to 90% of all drug offenders sent to prison. In the last 15 states, in at least 15 states, blacks are admitted to prison on drug charges at a rate of 25 times greater than whites. In fact, nationwide, the rate of incarceration for African American drug offenders dwarfs the rate of whites. When the war on drugs gained full steam in the mid-1980s, the prison administration for African Americans skyrocketed, nearly quadrupling in 3 years, and then increasing steadily until it reached in 2000 a level of more than 26 times the level in 1983. The number of 2000 drug admissions for Latinos was 22 times the number that it was in 1983. And whites have been admitted to prison for drug offenses at an increased rate as well. The number of whites admitted for drug offenses in 2000 was 8 times higher than in 1983. But the relative numbers are small in comparison to blacks and Latinos. Although the majority of illegal drug use and drug users nationwide are white. 3/4 of all people in prison for drug offenses have been black or Latino. In recent years, the rate of black imprisonment for drug offenses has dipped somewhat, declining approximately 25% from their zenith in the mid-1990s. But it remains the case that African Americans are incarcerated at grossly disproportionate rates throughout the United States. Their explanation, of course, is crime rates. These explanations have a tremendous appeal, but that's before you know the facts. For it is consistent with and reinforces the dominant narrative that race plays a huge role in crime and criminality, dating back to slavery. The truth, however, is that the rates and pattern of drug crime do not explain the glaring racial disparities in criminal justice system. So the book, right, which I think chapter 3 should have been, what's up? I think chapter 3 should have been the introduction. It talks about how she ran across this poster in, I believe it was in 2005. There was a group of folks trying to bring attention to the fact that black incarceration was a terribly mismanaged failure of the justice system. And in these stories, I think it highlights the problem of this racial caste system that we have, right? It was recently the documentary of Khalif Browder, where they had this young black kid who was arrested for stealing a backpack, spent almost 3 years in solitary confinement, close to 4 years in prison. Sandra Bland, who, ended up, dying in prison, was in prison because she didn't have $500. Not because she was this rabid criminal who was violent and ferocious. Not because, she committed mass homicides and vicious attacks, but because she didn't have $500 to pay bail. My goal in reading this book and wanting to introduce it to everyone that's watching the live stream and anybody who is going to watch later is to let you guys know that we are in a war. The war on drugs was the result of the continuation of Jim Crow, that they needed to reinforce this racial caste system. And in doing so, they devised this scheme to criminalize being black and to criminalize being poor. I'm getting a couple people saying, what's up, man? So, I'm sure there's folks who have stories about being incarcerated or being locked up and not being able to pay bail. What's good, Jennifer? Toys on the screen. First cousins I have, and I don't want to put too many names out there, but first cousins I have who are felons because the appeal of pleading guilty to the appeal of pleading guilty to a lesser charge is more desirable than going to court and, facing legal fees, having a disinterested lawyer, having a lawyer who's overwhelmed because they're court appointed. I think Meek Mills even mentions in the song. He says, you can't afford a lawyer and your court appointed is telling you to plea. So pleading guilty a lot of times just is appealing to us. And regardless of how much integrity you may have, the threat of facing, 15, 20 years for a crime that you didn't do, but you don't have the resources to fight, is not something that you want to go back and forth with. It's tempting to cop out. But anyway, though, I'm going to try to do my best to go through this book. I'm going to give you guys some highlights that I found in the chapters. Eventually, I'll bring some people on, maybe even do a call in where I'll have my phone and we could talk about other stories with those who may be victim or no victims of the war on drugs. I think that the war on drugs has a reach further than just the people incarcerated. In the statistic, there's some crazy numbers about how many people have been wrapped up in this drug sweep. And then once you're there, just the idea of escaping the war on drugs, is almost a pipe dream that you're going to be, my man Mac was good, that you're going to be victimized, due to this war. So I think that the weapons of our warfare, have to be a multitude, that we can't just, think, all right, we can sit back passively and try to police our own behavior. Man, I can't see. I don't got my glasses on. Man. Yeah, look, my man is a real one. A lot, very few people have it in them to say, man, I'm gonna face the man. I know that you've been involved in that fight, and that's something that you can stand up and, on your own to say, nah, I'm not gonna take no plea. The dynamic shifts though when you have kids at home and you're the sole provider, like the woman that we read about, Emma Stewart. When you got 2 children and the father isn't present and they're at home by themselves and you're trying to use your phone calls, a few that you might get, to find babysitters while you're trying to fight this case, it's tempting to take that plea. And I realize for me and you, people like us, it's different. Like, I could go to jail. I can take that, and I can, stand on my own integrity and say, nah, it's not me. I'm not copping out to anything. But there are people who don't have, the luxury that you and I have, right? We have incredible families. You got people that won't hold you down, and on top of that, you got the ability to maneuver in that situation. Like, if I go to jail, I know my kids are gonna be straight. I know that my family's gonna be taken care of. But there's a large segment of the black population that they don't have the resources and the tools to fight this war. But nonetheless, we're engaged in this war. So it's my goal to eventually equip black folks with the tools, with the resources, with the education, with the knowledge. One is knowing that we're in this war. And then 2 is knowing how to engage in this war. There's a book that we'll eventually go through called A Colony Within a Nation. I still have to respond to a post and have to post about my mindset. I'm still with Malcolm X when he said that we need to separate, right? That blacks need their own homeland. And I think it's the case that our social evolution has not propelled us past this tribalism, and that I will always be viewed first as a black man, which is something I'm proud of. But I know that being a black man in a white nation is a disadvantage. Since high school, I've held probably 30 jobs, right? And of those 30 jobs, I've been interviewed by a black person once. And 30 isn't an exaggeration. It might be an underestimation. It's just the reality of being black in this type of society. So I remember getting out of the military. I felt like I was overqualified, right, for a security officer position at a college in Delaware called Wesley College, right? I went in there sharp, looking good, suit and tie and shit, smelling good, haircut. And I go in there and I speak well. I speak the way that most of you guys know I can speak. Interviewer asks me the questions and I bullshit with the best of them. I give him the answers he needs and wants. I leave and somebody, in cutoff shorts and like a collared shirt has a dog with him, walks in, and I don't think much of it until I hear him say that he's there for the interview. The interviewer shakes his hand and they had this rapport that me and this white gentleman would never have. He was able to see himself in this man. So some of the books that we're going to go over, but first the new Jim Crow, just to let you guys know that there's absolutely a war on black folks. That the Jim Crow was not done away with, but it was reinvented. And that has been masked in this idea of the war on drugs. In the introduction, and I don't want to give too much of it away because I want to keep the interest. In the introduction, we talk about how the war on drugs was introduced before crack was introduced into the black community. That Ronald Reagan got on the platform and said that he was going to institute this war on drugs. And that even police officers and, police chiefs and commissioners were like, nah, this war on drugs is nonsense. We have other things to worry about. And crime is diminishing. That in order to get them to have this excitement about this war, that they had to incentivize it. So there's still laws in the books and laws that Barack Obama enforced that allows police officers to seize property, that your property, your money, your cars, your houses can be forfeited, not due to you being sentenced and convicted, but purely on the suspicion that your property was used in the commission of illegal drug activities. So if you're a woman whose boyfriend might have smoked marijuana 2 years ago, but in your vehicle, that vehicle was used in the transportation of marijuana, and your car can be impounded and sold at a police auction. Again though, man, I'm going to try to refine it, hopefully get a little bit of the jitters out, get used to this camera work and everything like that. I appreciate the 5 or 6 folks that stopped in. Salute to my man. No, you're a real one for real. I definitely, if you are comfortable, I want you to, tell some of your stories for sure. I think they're important. Some of the other folks that came through, man, appreciate y'all stopping in. I know a lot of y'all, y'all been involved in this war. Not sure if you know it or not, but especially those of you that have been in the system, y'all know that the war is real, whether you want to engage in it or not. But the book is, let me pull it up real quick. The book is The New Jim Crow. I'm going to find the author's name. Let's see. So Michelle Alexander, all right, New Jim Crow. If you want to read along, we're going to go ahead and start with we'll start with chapter 1. I wanted to do chapter 3 as the introduction. The war on drugs was a branded campaign, absolutely. Massive propaganda campaign. Listen. Man, I wish I had my glasses on. Where are they at? See, look, I broke these things up earlier today, so I can't see none of this shit. All right, the war on drugs was a branded campaign. It was a massive propaganda campaign that encompassed a societal view and projected the morality and expectations aimed at everyone for them to comply. Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's a massive campaign. The problem is when the policing in the community is focused on the supposed idea of who drug traffickers are and who drug addicts are. The image given to the warriors, right, who are fighting this war. And this is my problem with police, is that instead of thinking themselves and viewing themselves as guardians, they view themselves as warriors. So police who have this warrior vibrato on their chest, right? They view themselves as these warriors, and they view their enemies as as black folks. I mean, even the governor of Maine, right? In the face of glaring statistics, a state that only has about 2% black folks is like 98% white. Governor, I think it's LePage, said the enemy is blacks and Latinos. These were his words as a sitting governor of a state in the union. Said that blacks and Latinos were the enemy. While blacks only make up 14% of people arrested for all crimes in Maine, right? And these are FBI statistics. Only 14%. Knowing that blacks are targeted more, the war on drugs for sure had an intentional group of people. The documentaries that you saw coming out after that campaign featured black faces. They showed you black men and boys on the corner selling drugs. They showed you black drug addicts. And this type of propaganda we've seen used in third world countries when they wanted to start wars and war campaigns. They gave the public, and to include the police, a narrative of vicious black criminals and a drug problem that, I mean, which is why crack cocaine is prosecuted at 5 times the rate. Statistically established space would be right. Absolutely, I agree. You know, again, the idea that blacks use drugs or sell drugs more than their white counterparts is purely the result of propaganda. And it's intentional. I think in order to have this type of system, you have to have, you know, a black face to be the villain. Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, like you said, it's way too easy. Um, Rashay, what's up? How are you? So, we're about to end the live soon, though. I mean, unless anybody wants to come on, I would love to bring Mimi on because she's brilliant. And if you're cool, Mimi, say what's up so that way I can have you talk to some of the people. Your commentary is, you know, incredibly important, and I think your voice is something I would love for anybody who follows me or knows me to be able to hear and get your take on the situation. But for sure, though, it was way too easy for society to look at black people and see us as villains. I'm sure I have a huge delay, though. You know, I got AT&T, and it's hard for me to reach out and touch. So let's see. um, See, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm gonna go ahead and reach out to you. If you deny it, you deny it, right? But let's see. Um, you know, but yeah, no, absolutely, I agree that it was far too easy for society. And again, like I was saying, Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam had that idea that blacks should have their own separate country. Hey,
Don't
um,
judge me. Don't judge me.
yeah. So, for those of y'all who don't know, all two of you, this is my friend Mimi. You know, we met years ago, right? At not
Yeah.
Drill Park, at Lake Montebello. But real quick though, do you have any stories, any anecdotes, anything to add, or anything about the piece that we read?
I don't have any stories that I can say directly relate to me or affect me, but I know that historically, the way that they pushed the concept of the war on drugs was one in which they put the notion out there that drugs was a threat. It wasn't a concept of addiction. It was just this concept of the safety of your community is going to be compromised. And they peddled it hard to the middle class, which was very, very easy to do because middle class is, you know, just that level above the working poor. So because
Right.
classism intricately weaved into this society, it's very easy for people to feel like they're, you know, above this, they're better than. And if you're middle class, then you know, you don't live in the poor neighborhoods, you don't live in the ghetto, that doesn't affect you, it's not you, that's them. And if you're in the ghetto, then you must be, you know, this horrible person, you're a lazy person, you're dangerous, you're not to be trusted. And that was the imagery that was peddled with the war on drugs, was, you know, these crime-ridden ghettos. And it was never the trailer park, they never showed
Right.
it was always the inner cities. And any
Right.
imagery that was put into films or television, if it showed white people with any kind of drug situation, they were the victims. They were the ones that were shown as poor, you know, depressed, helpless addict. But the villain is the dealer. The villain was always a black or brown person. It was never a white person. So you peddle that into the minds of the middle class, and it's very easy for people to get on board with the notion that there is this threat, this imminent threat that's out to your communities. And at no point did they ever say the people that use drugs are going to be black people right away. It wasn't until they actually did introduce crack cocaine into the inner cities then they finally put a face to it. And again, it was never a notion of addiction is a problem, addiction is a disease. It was get these people off the streets so you're not, you know, in danger, because drug addicts steal from you, drug addicts break in
Right.
for the drug. And
Yeah.
again, it was easy for society to cotton on to all of that, because all you had pressed into your head was drugs are a threat, drugs are a threat, drugs are a threat, not drugs are the cause of disease known as addiction. It wasn't until the opioid crisis, now all of a sudden, oh my God, help your friend out, be supportive, put in rehab. No, no, no.
Yeah. And see, like you said, the white middle class is so fragile that it's easy for them to conceptualize this black threat. One, because
It's not just the white middle class.
right.
Black middle class cottoned on to it too, because again,
Oh yeah.
like to look and say, oh, we're not in the ghetto, you know, we worked hard to get out of there. That doesn't apply to us. It was a very us versus them, and black middle class got on board with it. Very much so.
So that, I mean, but like you were saying though, that reminds me of the governor of Maine, LePage, right? I just happened to pull it up, like what he said, because it was incredibly ridiculous. Unfortunately, though, I'm one of those people that reads the original comments, and this is the type of shit that keeps me up at night. Right? So while I try not to engage with it, these were, I mean, this was what he said, though, right? Hold on, I'm trying to find this quote. I mean, incredibly ridiculous, though. And at a town hall meeting. So he said blacks and Latinos are the enemy. This is the governor. Right? He says these are guys with names like D Money, Smoothie, Shifty, right? I mean, it's almost like a cartoon. These types of guys come from Connecticut and New York and come up here and sell their heroin and then go back home. Incidentally, half of the time they impregnate a young white girl before leaving. You know, I mean, these are words from a governor. Um, so, like you said, though, the idea and the image. I mean, this is a 400-year marketing plan, right? Put into place. That they've given you these ideas of lazy town and you know, these black monsters and these dark villains, and because of doing so, it was easy for, you know, and I feel like black folks, while a lot of them can be um, persuaded to, you know, jump onto the other side, right, to abandon the idea of their blackness and to say it's not, I'm not one of them, I'm one of the good Negroes, that they're not as easy a target. um, I've never been black middle class, so I don't know. You know what I mean? I've interacted with them heavily, I have my suspicions about the black middle class. I'm making black middle class money now, but it's going to take me some time to dig out of that hole and be part of that bourgeoisie. But it's for sure. Anytime I've engaged with white folks white folks of all classes really, um, it's easy for them to envision this, black villain because I don't know whether it's our social evolutionary adaptations, right, that has not propelled us past the point of this vicious tribalism, right, that says, well, I'm black and you're white, because you and I know that these lines are completely arbitrary, and that if you go to Brazil, what is black and what is white is completely different than what's black and white here in the United States. But as far as that war, the people who are victim of that war, um, you have this idea of people who look like you and I being these vicious criminals.
Well, my image is not projected as being the criminal. It's not.
Right.
Super light skinned black folk, we're the good ones. We're like how white people like their coffee, a lot of cream, a lot of sugar.
Right.
So,
Right.
we're not perceived as the threat. But the image of someone that looks like me is presented as the Jezebel. Like, we're the Jezebel image. You're this exotic creature that's just something to dabble with, but you don't marry, you don't take it home. No, you don't do that. But the image is there historically. It is historically ingrained in this society, in this country. I mean, all you have to look is the original Birth of a Nation film. The image of the
Right.
black man as being this threat to, precious white women and white society. And even in all your old country westerns from the silent film days, if it wasn't a black person that was a threat, it was this Mexican person, right? This
Right.
image, the bushy mustache, the wide sombrero, this over-exaggerated image. And after it was the Mexicans, then it was the Chinese. When you kept moving west, then it was the Chinese. They're shifty and you can't trust them, and they're always plotting something, always conniving. And once it was that, then you come back to the East Coast, and then it was the Irish, and it was the Italians, and then it was the Jews. So it's always some group, some demographic that doesn't fit quite perfectly into this little box that they want society to look like, which is this puritanical Judeo-Christian orthodoxy that's just ridiculous. It's this ridiculous standard that has been perpetrated for 500 years in this country, and nobody wants to society doesn't admit that the heavy influence of the corruption of how people view the way to treat each other in this society is heavily weighted in religious doctrine, and then it's transposed into this notion of societal morality, and it has nothing to do at all with how to treat your fellow man. It has everything to do with how to separate us from them.
Right. So I do feel like it's time to start ending the live. I know people are leaving. I appreciate you coming on, though. You were incredible and brilliant. And I look forward to having more dialogue with you, and talking about this war. Like, I think that the war on drugs for sure has a victim that is being largely neglected. Today, blacks are still incarcerated for things that are legal in several states, right? Like marijuana. So with that, I think eventually, as I go through the book, we'll talk about the war on drugs and the war on black folks and the war on the imagination of the minds of the rest of the population that allows this narrative to continue, that blacks are disposable, and that we can be and should be incarcerated for nonviolent offenses for 10, 20 years. But I appreciate you coming on, Mimi.
No problem. Thanks.
I'm gonna talk to you soon. All right.
All right.
All right. Peace.
Peace.